I'm sure. Please join me in welcoming one of our own, Don Stephenson.
Well, thank you, Don, and thank you, President Bob. It's a treat to be back. I guess I'm not alone like some of the members here. It has probably been 2 years, 18 months or 2 years since I've been back in person to a Rotary meeting. So as I look around the room, I'm sorry to say a bunch of you guys only look just a couple years older. That's, but it is a pleasure to be back in my club that I've been a member of since 1986. As I was, and Don, I sent you that email with the stuff on it. You didn't have to read it all. But I had applied for a car loan recently, and they asked for all this information. So I just sent that to Don. But he did leave out my wife, Patty. We've been married, going on 40-some years, 43 years this year, and 4 children, and soon to be 11 grandchildren. So we're doing our part for Social Security. It was interesting that as we were getting started, as I was preparing, Don called me a couple of months ago and asked me to prepare for this. I said, Don, it just seems like I just did this. So I went into my computer files and I found where, in fact, yes, May of 2019, I had done a similar program. So you almost got the same program I had then, but I added a few different slides. And I have not gone through and prepared extensive remarks, but I'm just going to kind of run through the slides and give you some updates of what's happening in the industry now, and then an anecdotal story about the energy situation as it stands. So if you'll run to the next slide, please, Bob. This is a map of the Colonial Pipeline. And the Colonial Pipeline was built in the early 60s from Houston, Texas up to Linden, New Jersey. And it basically provides most of the fuel for the eastern half of the United States. There's 2 lines. There's a gasoline line and a diesel fuel line. And I tell people that it largely follows I-85 up from Mississippi through Birmingham, Atlanta, Spartanburg, Charlotte, Greensboro, Richmond, Baltimore on up to the New York Harbor. And it's uneventful. It's a pipeline. It works, pretty much every day. The fuel goes in at the Texas end, Louisiana end. It's injected, and if you trade product on the pipeline, we do it in batches of 2,000 barrels. And there's 2,000 barrels, 42 gallons, 210,000 gallons of fuel is what moves on the pipeline. And when you buy and sell, you do it in those units. And it basically moves at about a little faster than walking speed from Texas to the end. And then they break it off at different places along the way up. The closest terminal to us here, if you're familiar with Knight's Play over in Apex, just on the other side of the fence from Knight's Play, is a Motiva terminal. It's called Raleigh up there, but it's actually in Apex, North Carolina. That's the closest terminal to us. There's a bunch of terminals down in Selma, North Carolina, near Smithfield as well. And so, like I say, it's just part of the infrastructure of the country that's been in place for, going on 60 years, 70 years. Until April the 29th of this year, when a hack from we believe a Russian group called DarkSide hacked into the computer systems of the Colonial Pipeline. And this was what happened. This actually is a Costco station in Charlotte, but had the same scene pretty much everywhere, because in an abundance of caution, the pipeline owners and managers shut it down end to end. Now, this did not come out at the time, but I found through subsequent, public press, and believe me, the folks from Colonial haven't called me up at the meeting, kind of inside information. This is just what I picked up from reading newspaper accounts or online accounts. Interestingly, the bad guys did not hack into the actual fluid handling system, the system that controlled the pumps and the valves and the gauges that move the product up the pipeline. That was unaffected. What they hacked into was the accounting system. Because when we put one of those 2,000 barrels tenders onto the pipeline down in Texas, part of what the pipeline does is keep track of it for us until it gets up here to North Carolina or wherever we or whoever the owner sends it to. And then when it comes off the pipeline and into the terminal, they print a meter ticket. That's all electronic now, but they print a meter ticket that says, okay, and let's just say you can break it off. You don't have to send all 2,000 barrels to one place. You can break it off at different terminals. But okay, you've got this many gallons of gasoline or diesel fuel into this terminal at this time. And that accounting system is how all the money changes hands between all the players on the pipeline. And that is what got hacked. And the pipeline, because as you can imagine, 1,800 miles of fuel at that time, probably about $2.50 a gallon. That's a lot of money that they lost track of. Nobody knew who owed what to who if they had kept the product moving. And that's why they shut it down. They shut it down until they could get the accounting system back up so that when you got a delivery product, you knew that was your product and who you owed the money to. So that was what happened back in May of this year. And, I had friends, and it was terrible. I mean, I had friends ask me, well, what happened? What's it like being in the business? Well, imagine being in the airline business without any planes. I mean, that is what it's like for a petroleum company when the pipeline shuts down. We were able to get we can bring fuel into the waterborne terminals along the East Coast, Jacksonville, Florida, Savannah, Charleston, Wilmington, but that's much slower. You've got to schedule it way out in advance. And so that's how we covered part of the shortage. This is a chart of WTI crude, which is West Texas Intermediate Crude Oil trading, the August contract trading on the New York Mercantile Exchange. And this chart's actually a couple of days old. Today it's about 60 cents. It's come down about $6 a barrel since I pulled this chart. But what I want to show you on this chart, what is interesting is back around back around April of 2020, not 2021, 2020, you see that extraordinary dip down to the closing price closed at just under 20. It dropped from about $40 a barrel down to negative $25 a barrel for one day. And nobody had ever seen anything like that in my career. Kind of wrap your head around this for a second. I mean, you had to pay somebody $30 a barrel to take it off of your hands for this one particular day. It was the May contract of 2020. So next slide. The reason that happened was this is from FRED, that stands for the Federal Reserve Economic Data Unit. This shows passenger miles traveled for cars, trains, and airplanes during this period of 2020. And you can see in 2019, you can see the impact of COVID right there. I mean, the blue line and the black line is rail and airline traffic. It drops to just about zero. Motor vehicle traffic drops by some 40% at that time. And the problem was the industry. You can't just turn an oil you can't turn oil well off, but you can't turn a refinery off very easily. So they had to keep producing product even though demand was going through the floor. So next slide, please. And at this time, back in April of 2020, you can see how that price goes below zero, goes to negative $30-some a barrel for that one day. And here's why. Anybody here from Oklahoma? Okay.
I worked there.
Okay. every night when the news comes on and they talk about the price of crude oil, it's based off, a lot of it's based off the inventory price in this place, Cushing, Oklahoma, where all of the crude oil pipelines cross. And they measure that inventory every week. The government measures it every week and reports it. So next slide. Cushing, Oklahoma is a one industry town, just like Kannapolis or Concord or Burlington or textile towns. Cushing, Oklahoma exists to store crude oil. And this is a Google Earth picture of what that town looks like. And you can see that's what they do in Cushing, Oklahoma. Go back to this time in 2020. Demand had collapsed. The refineries are still producing. The oil wells, I mean, if you're a producer and you get paid and you owe the banks billions of dollars to pay for your wells that you drilled, the fracking that you're doing in Oklahoma or Texas, wherever, you got to keep producing because you got a note payment due at the end of that month, regardless of whether anybody's buying gasoline or not. And so that was a problem for these guys. These are the traders of the New York Mercantile Exchange in New York. And for my entire career in this industry, at some price, there's always been a buyer for every seller. There just has to be, if not, the price adjusts and it just goes lower until somebody's willing to pay you what they've got to sell for. And so even though the literal legal contracts for futures product says you've got to take physical delivery, nobody ever took physical delivery. You could always find somebody to sell your position to because there was somebody that needed it at some price until April of 2020, when that demand completely collapsed. All of those tanks in Cushing, Oklahoma were full. Every other tank in the country was full. There was nowhere to put your fuel if you got it, because they had filled up tankers floating offshore. You can see pictures of Singapore, Rotterdam, all around the world. Every tank in the world was full of either crude oil or gasoline or diesel fuel, and there was nowhere to put it. And so because of that, it literally, for one day on the expiration of that May contract, it drove the price to negative $30 a barrel. So you had to pay somebody $1 a gallon to take that stuff off your hands. Never seen anything like that in our industry before. Let's fast forward to now. I think that's about right. I think gas in Cary is about $2.89 a gallon. So I think diesel fuel's higher than that. That was the only slide I could find. What's been happening recently with the crude oil running up to $70-some a barrel this spring and summer? Let's go to the next slide. The main problem is with these guys. Saudi Arabia and their neighbors to the east, the United Arab Emirates. Those of you that are my age and close to it, remember when OPEC kind of set the price for crude oil around the world. The OPEC would meet twice a year and the news followed it, and they had reporters there and they told you what OPEC was doing every time they met because it instantly translated to the price at the pump. Not so much now, because there's way more crude oil around than there was back in those days, back in the 70s and 80s. But there's a new group now called OPEC Plus. And OPEC Plus is basically all of OPEC plus Russia. And there got to be kind of an intramural squabble between Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates about what their next contract allotment was going to be. The rules that said how, because they all agreed how much crude oil they can produce every day. And the Saudis and UAE and the Russians could not get together on a plan. They had several meetings where they got together and it broke up in an impasse. And so that scared the industry. And so prices kept creeping up and up and up and up through July of this year. They have now, I understand they've now gotten together with an informal agreement, probably formalized in their next meeting. I think it's in September. But I think we'll start to see the prices start to drop like that. So that was part of what has run the prices up so much recently. Next slide, please. The other part of it is this. For the week of July 4th, 2021, the highest vehicle miles traveled week in American history. If you were out driving around on the 4th of July, you can probably believe that. It was, the roads were, there was a lot of pent-up demand, people wanting to go somewhere. And the economy was freeing up, COVID was coming down, and people rushed to the roads to go to the beach, the mountains, grandma's house, wherever they were going. So you had this combination of high demand, not so high supply, and the prices are up where they are now. That's kind of what's happened. You know, this is a 100-year-old industry. It doesn't change that much, but that's kind of what's happened in the last couple of years. That's interesting. This is a map. This is a map of the shale plays, what the geologists call the shale plays in the United States. The biggest ones and most famous ones are the Eagle Ford down in Texas, the Permian, that's West Texas, over into New Mexico, the Bakken Shale up in North Dakota, and then the Marcellus there in West Virginia and Western Pennsylvania. That is where the crude oil production in these areas are what has turned America into crude oil independent. So next slide. I was telling the folks at our table, we just recently moved my daughter and son-in-law back from Boston, and we had a condo we would stay in when we would go see them up there. And as you would drive around Boston, this is the Tobin Bridge, and it was the bridge that connected Boston to the Chelsea, the north side of town. You know, probably 100,000, maybe 150,000 cars a day go over the Tobin Bridge, except once a week when the Boston police and the Massachusetts Highway Patrol come out, shut down traffic on the Tobin Bridge. The United States Coast Guard brings in a fleet of vessels into the harbor, and they escort one of these guys in. And this is a liquefied natural gas tanker. They are gigantic. They are the size of an aircraft carrier. And that is what brings natural gas that has been liquefied down at 250 degrees to turn into a liquid. They bring it into a LNG import terminal in Boston over on the north side of the bridge in Chelsea. It's something to see if you've never seen it before. I mean, it's quite an operation, and it happens about once a week up there. They bring these LNG tankers in once a week. Next slide. This is a chart of natural gas prices going back to, I guess back in the 90s. And you can see it started out at about $4 a million cubic feet. That's what the MMF or MCF, million cubic feet, $4. Got the period of 2000 kind of jumped up to about 16. Then you can see in 2000 and about 2003, it jumps up to almost $20 a million cubic feet. In 2008, it gets back up to about $18 a million cubic feet. And when that happened, the country got concerned about what was going to happen to all the natural gas, and plans were put into place at a lot of port cities around the country to build a LNG import terminal. So next slide. Including this guy. This guy is, make sure I get his name right here. Sharif Sakai. And Mr. Sakai was born in Egypt, but he was raised and educated in Lebanon, where his father was a reporter for Newsweek. He came to the United States to be educated and got into and they landed in Houston. He after college, he decided to get into the energy business. And he kind of had a small exploration company until this time around 2005, when he and some other folks and bankers decided they were going to get into the LNG import business. So, next slide. And they were planning to build this plant right here with a company called Cheniere Energies on the Sabine River between Louisiana and Texas. And the idea was they were going to bring in those those LNG tankers from around the world. Australia is a big producer, Qatar is a big producer, Indonesia is a big producer. And at $16 to $20 a barrel, you could afford to move that stuff around, excuse me, a million cubic feet. You could afford to move that stuff from around the world and bring it into the United States. And this was a regasification plant that would take the liquefied natural gas out, bring it back to atmospheric temperature, and turn it back into a gas and inject it into the gas pipelines. Next slide. Around 2008, Mr. Sakai gets a call from this guy. This is Aubry Mcclendon. Aubry Mcclendon was the CEO of Chesapeake Energies, who was a natural gas producer in the United States, and with a local connection, actually went to Duke. I think the visitor center is named for him. Mr. Mcclendon called up Mr. Sakai and says, hey, what do you think it would cost to turn your plant around? And instead of bringing liquefied natural gas into the United States, we want to reverse it and send liquefied natural gas out of the United States. Now, remember, Mr. Sakai and his partners had just spent about $1 billion building a plant to bring it in. And now this guy gives him a call and says, we want you to send it the other way. And that was his first indication as to how much natural gas was being produced through all these fracking wells that were out there. Next slide. He dismissed, Mr. Mcclendon was a small player in the energy world at that time. And so he kind of dismissed that call out of hand until a couple of months later, he gets a call from these guys. How much would it cost to turn your plant around? And instead of bringing natural gas into the country, we want to ship it out. And Shell's a player. I mean, if you get a call from Shell, these people know what they are serious players. They know what they're doing. And so Mr. Sakai says, hey, maybe there's something to this. And so, in fact, that's what they did. Starting in 2009, they completely re-engineered the plant. And instead of taking liquefied natural gas off of boats and turning it into natural gas in the United States, they were taking natural gas in the United States, liquefying it, and putting it on boats, sending it overseas. And that's what it's doing today. It is an export facility today. And you can see what's happened to the price of natural gas since that peak in 2008. You can see it's slowly gone down. It got down below $2 a million cubic feet back around 2019. But it's peaked back up a little bit. It goes, it's seasonal. Obviously, in the wintertime, there's more demand in the summertime. But this just kind of gives you kind of an anecdotal story to tell you how much of this stuff the United States has now that we're in the what do they call it? Fracking. Now that we're fracking. And that is my last slide. So I'll be happy to answer any questions. How much time have I? Oh, I got about 5 minutes for questions. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so what's your opinion about all the pipelines that have been stopped, like the ACL for now, and then the Trans Valley?
Right. Well, you're probably asking the wrong guy because I'm in the business. I'm in the business. So. But if the reason that they have to stop traffic once a week in Massachusetts and bring in a tanker is because there's no pipeline taking natural gas up there. They could bring that stuff out of Pennsylvania and Western. Well, they can't. It's illegal to frack in Western New York, but they could bring natural gas out of Pennsylvania and West Virginia to to Massachusetts very easily. So I'm a fan of pipelines. Yes, Bruce.
Donald, just to add to the Colonial Pipeline goes through my grandfather's farm. Whatever the Appalachian one was, I got a mess on my farm right now. I got pipe in the ground, I got pipe above ground, and we can't farm the land. They have messed up farmers all up and down. They cut my forest out.
Yep.
So we just got a royal mess because the government's interference over some people that didn't want to go along with it. But the Colonial Pipeline, we never had an explosion on our farm. None of the animals have dropped dead. The trees have not turned red or green. We've not had any major forest fires or anything. And they paid us quite well for.
To store pipe on your property now, yeah. Thank you, Bruce. Yes, back to Ernie.
What's the diameter of the Colonial Pipeline?
Let's see. I said, oh boy, you guys got all these tricks. I think it's 60 inches. I think each line is. I think it's 60. I think the main line is 60. Then it shrinks down on the spur lines. But you might be able to find out. Yeah. Yes.
It seems like every time the price of oil goes down per barrel, the stock market goes down with it. How does that tie into each other?
Well, so let me quickly tell you, I don't know for sure. Here's what I would guess. A couple things. Number one, the major oil companies are all a component of the S&P 500. I guess at one time they were part of the Dow 30, but I know that they rate that high anymore. So when crude falls, their value falls, that drags the market down. The other thing is, some people may believe that energy demand is a proxy for the economy as a whole. If we need less fuel, that means there's less people driving around, less trucks on the road, there's less of the economy churning. So that would be my guess. Yes.
What are the oil guys going to be doing in 25 years from now?
Well, I'm going to be retired, but so I told Don this is that I've given talks like this for 25 years, I guess, including I used to give it at my alma mater, Appalachian State. I go speak to the business school every year on the only thing I was qualified to speak on, which is the evil oil industry. And I would always start my talk by looking out this room full of undergrads. I would say, how many of you believe that we'll be driving gasoline-powered cars in 100 years? Nobody raised their hand. How many believe we'll be driving internal combustion cars in 50 years? Nobody raised their hand. 25 years, a few hands may go up to. So the short answer is, I don't know. But I do know, and all the folks that are in the industry that are my age know, that this is not the industry for the 23rd century. I mean, you got to be doing something else about it. And who knows where technology will take us. But, and I don't have to know this, the Department of Energy has a building full of PhDs in Washington, D.C. to study this stuff for us. And they twice a year, they publish a report, short-term and long-term energy outlook. They believe that U.S. Fuel demand will peak around 2030, but will be surprisingly flat going out through 2060 or maybe 2050. It's going to drop off some, but if you think about it, there's 40 million people in the country. There's about that many registered motor vehicles as well. And the average age is getting older and older and older. And so even if you started replacing them tomorrow, it would take a while to replace them all. So
One more question.
Yes, sir.
April 2020, I saw Fred's numbers. Were those just numbers on the graph? Did anybody pay anybody to take oil off their hands?
Anybody? Oh yeah, absolutely. Yes. If you had a contract and you wanted to sell, if you could not take physical possession of that product, you had to pay somebody $30 to take it off your hands. Absolutely. Lasted for one day till the next contract.
How long do they have to close the bridge for?
Usually about 6 hours to bring it in, get it settled. It's a mess. I'm telling you, it is a mess.
Thank you so much. You might be aware that we have a world famous artist.
I am aware of that.
And he has prepared this for you for this evening.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you, Don. As a native Bostonian, I'll tell you that the Tobin Bridge feels like it's closed most hours. But that is a fascinating story. Thank you so much for sharing the insights that you have in the industry. I think it's just illustrative of all the varied expertise that resides among our public. So thank you for sharing that with the rest of us. We really do appreciate that. I do want to make sure that we announce some red letter days that are coming up. We missed it yesterday, but Hal Jordan, happy birthday. If you see John and Shirley Ogle, they celebrate today 23 years of marriage. So congratulations to John and Shirley.
Maybe 53 years.
Maybe they were.
As I've demonstrated today, data interpretation may not be my strength. John and Paula Rigsby will celebrate an anniversary on the 24th. My sources tell me that's 45 years. So, John, do you have a couple more days yet to celebrate your anniversary with Paula? He's checking.
It's only the 28th.
Speaking of lead sharing, Neil, you might want to get in touch with. Well, congratulations to all of you on those anniversaries, special days. Next week's program, Sal Camerato is going to bring Mark Dill with a story of the legend of the first super speedway. So I've really been looking forward to that one for several weeks. The meal. I'm told that the meal next week will be a pork chop with roasted potatoes and mustard gravy. It might look a lot like vegetable lasagna. Might be grouper. I don't know. I hope if it's the grouper a week away, I'm not so sure. In 2 weeks, we've got a program I shared with you last week that the board did some work on updating our strategic plan. So in 2 weeks, we'll spend some time just providing some updates and getting input from all of you on our goals and priorities, and in particular, our focus for the first quarter, so you won't want to miss that. Generally speaking, we don't go 3 weeks out, but I did want to share that our district governor, Angela Bendorf Jameson, will be joining us for our meeting on August 10th. So it's always a great opportunity to get insights into what's happening at the district level. And of course, as a new president, it's always nice to have a full room too. So you're all invited back. She can't compare to Dawn as a draw, but if you can come on back for that, we'd really appreciate it. So I do want to thank you again, Dawn. I want to welcome you, Ellen. So happy that you came back to join us again. Tim, Leslie, our thoughts and our dollars are with you in terms of the pig picking. Good luck as you move into August. And as we adjourn our meeting, I'd ask Bob Lyerly to lead us in the four-way test. Bob?
Let us close our meeting with a four-way test of things we think, say, or do.
Or is it to do true, to the care of all concerned? Will it build goodwill? Will it be beneficial to all concerned?
Hi, everyone.
Bye, everybody. See you next week.
See you next week.
Even the way I'm not afraid. I've never seen. Yeah, I've never seen that. I can understand. It's just black. But it's what it is. Well, there's so what you do is if you look at it's 210,000. And if you're going from 87 octane to 93 octane, you can go back that round that because the promise said when it goes down, they run a slug, not heavy barrels. They run a slug interface material to keep it hard to keep it down. Yeah.
Can we get a copy of this meeting? Hello? Anybody home? This meeting is being recorded. Anybody home? Hello?
You're doing well.
Well, it's gonna be a car, but it's gonna be something else.
Hey, Bob. Bob. Everybody's gone.
Yes, yes. Well, she got pregnant, so she quit, and she worked, when she got up there, so I spent $1 zillion to send her to Elon to make her an opera. So she goes up to Boston, and it's a job. And she did that for about 2 years, but that was, she wasn't making any money, and good auditions all the time. It doesn't come from that. I tell people that the arts, any of the arts, is like the PGA Tour. There's 60 million people who play golf. And so specifically work for my team. And she was in my team for about 5 years. And then she went with a group that was doing, it was actually a subsidiary of Boston. That, you know how Austin has the big South by Southwest Festival. Boston was trying to get something going called Hub Week. They were going to do a technology, technology. And so she went to work for them about 2 years ago. And that's what I so, but her husband's a David. He works for State Street.
Yeah, yeah.
But they like it. All right. See you guys.
It's 6:30.